Welcome, and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. On the program today, we're joined by best-selling author John Gray. Many of you might remember him from his wonderful best-selling books, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. He spent more than 4 decades helping people to understand and create better relationships with each other. And in the last dozen years or so, he has actually been lecturing around the world on topics such as health and better and ways that we can stay focused in a hyper world, which is the title of his new book. There are natural solutions for ADHD, memory, and brain performance. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, Mr. John Gray. Mr. Gray, thank you for joining us.
Real pleasure, real pleasure.
You know, here's somebody that's really been out there talking about this stuff, and I kind of wondered, does it ever get tiring after a while? I mean, after as much time as you spent doing this?
You know, I think it could get tiring if it was the same talk. Generally, it's an evolving message, and every audience is different, so my talks are different. I just finished writing another new book called Beyond Mars and Venus, so it'll come out next year. There's always... What's happening in our relationships is the landscape is always changing. The challenges couples face today, for example, is not just communication, which as many of my other books focus on, but it's understanding how men and women have hormonal differences, and certain behaviors will put our hormones out of balance, and other behaviors will put our hormones in balance. And there's a lot of new research showing how dramatically different men and women's hormone balance is, what triggers it, and then I take that research and apply it to practical tools for our relationships. And that's like really, really important because particularly over 50, one of our biggest challenges to feel happiness and for our relationships to thrive is to have a body that's producing abundance of healthy hormones in the right balance. Hormones regulate our mood, our focus, our motivation, our brain chemicals. And you mentioned one of my books of this year, which is Staying Focused in a Hyper World. Half the book is for children, but the other half is for people over 50 because over 50, 1 out of 6 women has dementia. 1 out of 9 men. More women are getting Alzheimer's by 3 to 1. So this is, and 1 out of 2 people over 84 have Alzheimer's. These are really big issues for us. You know, people are living longer due to some medical treatments, but the quality of life has dramatically gone down. And we want to make sure that we sustain optimal brain function. Without great brain function, everything else starts to age too quickly and problems start resulting.
Now, here's a question that was really burning in me as I was reading your book, Staying Focused in a Hyper World, is when you, let's say, first started out there with Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. Now, this was a book that you actually wrote in the 1980s, correct?
I taught it in the 80s.
Okay.
It came out in the 90s.
Okay, I kind of figured that, but what I was more interested in is, as you were teaching this, you were out with, speaking in front of audiences, doing seminars and workshops. The 1980s, technologically speaking, is a much different time than it is this day and age. How different do you see the audiences when it comes to attention itself?
Oh, tremendous. This overstimulation by media, what it does, it gives us a shorter attention span. And when you have a shorter attention span, what that means is you become distracted easily. And for women, that shows up as a feeling of overwhelm. And for men, you become distracted unless the stimulation is very strong, like, searching through the Internet, going through your emails, pornography online, driving fast, and all addictive substances. These sugar, for example. These substances and experiences stimulate higher levels of the brain chemical dopamine, which keeps us focused. Otherwise, we feel bored, we feel restless, we feel distracted, and eventually our hormones then go out of balance. And for men, it shows up as low testosterone, and for women, it shows up as low estrogen and low progesterone. And these are the hormones that are necessary for women and men in their different camps to feel well-being and actually to improve communication, as odd as that sounds. But communication is really about hearing another point of view and integrating it with your own point of view without defensiveness. And what happens is when when our hormones are out of balance, what happens is our stress hormones increase, and that causes in the brain blood flow stops from the front part of the brain and goes to the back part of the brain, where we really have no communication skills to empathetically hear another point of view. We tend to only hear our point of view in our brain and argue other points of view. And this is what happens. People get, curmudgeons as we get older. We become, more irritable. We become more grumpy. We become more resistant to change. We become less adaptable. And these are all due to brain changes, which can lead eventually to dementia and Alzheimer's.
Now, it's interesting because I didn't know this, but you were saying that it wasn't until the 1980s that the term attention deficit disorder was actually first coined. And back in the 1970s, as I was in grade school, I didn't understand at the time, but of course back in retrospect, I can look back and see what was going on, is that I was having a series of visits to a psychologist, and I think that I was actually, I'm just going to say labeled hyperactive attention deficit, okay? But they didn't really use that term. It was more like hyperactivity. In other words, I was restless in class. I was the kind of kid that not only visited the principal's office on a regular basis, but I also knew most of his next of kin, as I would say. But, it was a matter of, when I look back at those times, sitting in a classroom, for an hour to 2 or maybe even 3 hours at a time in between recess and lunch and the time you go home, got rather difficult, especially when I didn't find that the subject matter was really holding my attention. Now, as opposed to other children who weren't as disruptive, I was just kind of fidgety. I just had energy. My mother said, well, just let him leave the classroom and go for a walk for about 5 minutes and have him come back and you should be just fine. But it was one of those situations, because I was disruptive and not meaning to be, not in any kind of malice in any way, but, it begins to really wear on you, realizing that you start having a belief system that says you deserve to be punished for who you are. But yet who I wasn't really entirely my fault, so to speak. Now, they had me on Ritalin, but my mother said she had started cutting it down to, I guess it was a half a pill. And then after a while she said, you know what, forget this. I don't want a zombie as a kid. Then she just took me off that entirely. And we tried finding more natural alternatives, like you talk about, such as supplementation. But let's talk about what ADHD is. Is this something a person is born with, or is it something that you can actually, I guess, acquire?
Well, let's first look at how you can acquire it. First we'll look at normal brain function and how it can shift to ADD, and then we'll look at how ADD can be right from birth, and it can then be reversed. That's the most important thing. It's just a symptom of a phenomenon of the brain, which is dopamine, which is the brain chemical of focus and interest. When high levels of dopamine, and let's say what would actually cause high levels of dopamine would be life and death danger. When our soldiers are in battle, if you looked at their brains, you would see that the same thing is occurring in their brains is similar to when you take cocaine. Cocaine produces massive energy, focus, pleasure, and so forth for a temporary period of time, and then afterwards you feel a crash. And the reason you feel crash is because when the way the brain works is these brain chemicals get released, and in a sense, think of it like pouring water into a bucket. The brain chemical is water going into the bucket. And if the bucket is full, and then another bucket is full, then your brain removes one of the buckets. It says, that's too much stimulation. We'll age too quickly. Our heart will beat too fast. The body needs a nice balance of stimulation. So when you overstimulate the brain, and that could be with sugar, it can be with an iPad, it can be with pornography, certainly it can be with danger, anything which is dangerous, will stimulate high levels of dopamine. Coffee does it to a moderate amount. That's what Ritalin does, is it's really kind of like a low-dose cocaine. And when you stimulate the brain, then you overstimulate it, you feel greater focus, you relax, you can be attentive to one thing quite easily. You don't demand higher stimulation because you're getting it. But the outcome is now your body starts moving these buckets of receptor sites. And so normal stimulation doesn't do hardly anything for you. What you need is hyperstimulation. And that becomes hyperactivity. It becomes, for some children and adults, hypersensitivity. For some, it becomes hypercompulsiveness. at any age, and it can become hyper distracted, where you're constantly looking for something new and different, otherwise you feel bored in your life. So this is a phenomenon that's happening to all of our kids, and it's most diagnosed when our kids are hyperactive, kind of like what you were. You're sitting in a class and you're disruptive and impulsive and so forth. That's actually just one body type. There's other body types. You'd see some people who are like, really good students, but they're hyper performers and wanting to please, but they're always hard on themselves. So it always comes back to issues of self-esteem and issues about ourselves when we don't get the right support for our condition. Now, your mother was very wise. Restless child, let them go use their muscles for a little while, and they'll calm down. And that's because when dopamine levels go too high, basically, why would they go too high? Because the receptor sites are so diminished, then your brain says, I'm feeling bored. I need some stimulation. So your body's moving and wiggling and looking around, looking for something to stimulate. Too much of that then produces adrenaline. And when adrenaline is there, adrenaline will needs physical activity, otherwise it will create restlessness. And so your body basically was telling you, I need to use my muscles to bring down this adrenaline, and it wasn't happening. So that's one of the things that parents need to know is with kids with ADHD, activity is very, very important. Sitting in a classroom is going to be much harder for them, but the condition that gave rise to all of this in the first place is this hyperdopamine stimulation, which then downregulates the dopamine receptor sites, which now means you become more motivated for more stimulation. So when I mentioned before, women, they feel overwhelmed. They're always looking for something, some problem they have to solve, some problem. They become hyper-vigilant to see the danger, to see the problem. Oh, I promised that person. Oh, I got to do this. Oh, but the house is a mess. Oh, but I have to. The brain loops and loops and loops in a hyper way, simply because it's looking for, on a biological level, stimulation of dopamine, and it's learned that danger stimulates dopamine. Some people are addicted to success. They have to keep working if they're successful. That success also stimulates dopamine. It's amazing. The opposite forces, danger means urgency, and success, is look what I can do, look what more can I do. So it's always newness stimulates dopamine. That's why when we start a relationship, there's so much excitement and pleasure and interest and motivation. But as the newness wears away and you begin to take your partner for granted, you begin to expect what they're going to do, you've seen it over and over and over, the automatic dopamine, high dopamine response tends to become less and less. So that's where people today, it's so much divorce is going on. Because they're just no longer interested in their partner, not excited by their partner, but they meet somebody else and they feel this excitement, this rush, this feeling of aliveness, which is really just getting to experience the natural flow of dopamine as if you had plenty of dopamine buckets. But once again, it's like an addiction. We're dependent on higher levels. And the good news is we can bring back those dopamine receptor sites, but it takes, for different people, it takes a different amount of support.
So as you write in your book, How to Stay Focused in a Hyper World, it's really true that it's really in the brain and not in the head. It sounds like. Yeah.
It's basically there's biological conditions. And actually when we talk about the brain, much of the brain is actually regulated and supported by the gut. So this is the latest research, which is coming out in the last 3 years, just talking about what's called the microbiome. It's microorganisms. These are the probiotics. People have heard of that, that live in our gut, and there's 2 pounds of it, and it's like another brain. And most people are not aware of that. Scientists were not aware of that, but it's been there all along, and it makes all these brain chemicals. It sends messages through the vagus nerve to the brain to stimulate either stress or calm or peace. Reactions happen in our gut before even in the brain, and a healthy gut is very important for this balanced brain function, which is very important for balanced hormones. And, of course, then out-of-balance hormones cause stress to go up. That changes brain chemistry, and then that inhibits digestion and gut function. So it's like a circle, and we can intercept at any level often I will suggest supplements right away to intercept and support natural things that will support the upregulation of dopamine receptors in the brain, the increase of dopamine production and serotonin production and GABA production. There's these proteins that will help to do that. There's something called fruit extracts that will also help do it, like grapeseed extract and so forth. Immediately people start to focus. And these are all natural substances, natural proteins that are pre-digested. The proteins are pre-digested so that the brain can assimilate them. Because as people get older, the digestion just isn't working as well to produce the precursors to making these brain chemicals. We've also, probably had a big load of antibiotics throughout our lives, and antibiotics wipe out these good bacteria. Even medical doctors today, who are usually about, 3 decades behind the curve when it comes to health, they're good at disease, but when it comes to health, that's not what they're trained in. Even medical doctors are now saying, go to your health food store and buy some probiotics if you take antibiotics. But we're still in the early stages of understanding probiotics. I get my probiotics from Switzerland, which is way more advanced than America, and there's 42 different strains, whereas in America you'll generally get 3 strains, which are usually not even missing in the gut. And so you want to get a wide range of these. They focus in America more on numbers of bacteria.
I noticed that.
Yeah, billions and billions of them. You go, wow, what am I getting? But what's more important is that you're getting a variety of them because that's what's getting wiped out. And also, we're exposed to all these foods with pesticides in it. Pesticides, they kill bugs. That's what they do. That's what a pesticide does. And it goes into the plant. It's still in the plant. It goes into our body. Those pesticides kill the bacteria. They kill some good bacteria. They kill some bad bacteria in our gut. And the bad bacteria, there really is no bad bacteria, generally speaking. It's just when it overpopulates. And some bacteria are like weeds. And when these good bacteria get wiped out, then the bad bacteria, the only reason they're bad is because they overgrow. They grow very quickly. They're very hardy. They're just like weeds, and they overtake the garden of good flora in the gut. And that's called yeast infection and candida, and it can be throughout the body. And almost every single disease can be mimicked by candida, fungus. Even cancer and so forth can be right from fungus. So it's a lot of these conditions that we're seeing today goes back to this, all the conditions I just mentioned. There's improper digestion, there's improper brain function, there's high stress levels, there's hormonal imbalance. And I know it's a lot to say all that, but, the body's a very complicated thing, and you start with one piece at a time. What I find is that good probiotic, good mineral support for the brain, and good proteins, and good omega-3, and boom, and some grapeseed extract and vitamins. And it's not too much. It's like 5 things. I do it every day. And I got on this road, as a relationship teacher, I got on this road because 15, 16 years ago, when I was just over 50, I started having the symptoms and was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. And I said, whoa, I'm going to find a natural solution to this. And I did. And I do it quite regularly, just the things I was just saying. Now, that was early stage Parkinson's, and my book, as you noticed, and at my website, I give references to doctors who use natural solutions that heal the condition as opposed to taking the therapeutic dose of what a medical doctor prescribes only gets worse. And that's all well known. When you take Parkinson's drugs, the condition gets worse and worse and worse. But you keep relieving the symptoms, but now you have to take more of the drug until it doesn't work at all. There's another route to that, which is rather than taking these high doses of something called carbidopa, which makes more and more dopamine in your brain, instead you come back to, okay, what is it my body needs to make the dopamine and upregulate those dopamine receptor sites in the first place? So that's Dr. Hinz, Hinz. People can look on Google search for him. He's the one who did the research on the natural solutions. I have my own, which are similar to his as well. But he's, a medical doctor. People who like to go that route. That's good, too.
Now, it's really interesting when you take a look at how food has been produced here in the United States, or call it in civilized countries or industrialized countries, over the last 50, 60, 70 years. It really has changed because you're feeding more and more people, so you're producing things to a level which are become very unnatural. And then you start seeing a lot of these things, such as the diseases, the mental health disorders, on the increase. And I think what's astounding, too, is when you take a look at that correlation, I'm not saying it's the only one with our food, but it certainly is a big one, that you find, let's say, the medical community scratching their head trying to say, well, we don't understand where this is coming from, but it almost seems obvious, doesn't it?
Oh, it's so obvious, and there's many parameters to it, so you can't just nail it into one. One that comes to mind, since my most recent book, Beyond Mars Venus, is all about hormones. There's an amazing study which shows that when they started giving women who are going through menopause the prescribed hormones. Now, there's two types. There's something called synthetic hormones that doctors prescribe. Part of that comes from pregnant cow's urine. And this is the medical procedure, prescribed medical procedure began, I'm forgetting the date, either 1940 or a little bit after that, they started increasing the use of these artificial or animal-sourced hormones to help women during menopause. And it shows the use has increased every year up to 2002. And if you look on the same graph, you'll see the incidence of cancer for women increased along the same curve. It's amazing, up to 2002. Then at 2002, there's this big study of nurses that have been going on for years, and it showed that your risk of cancer doubled if you were taking these menopausal drugs or hormones. Now, when I say risk increased, that doesn't mean everybody got it, cancer. It meant that the risk of it increased. So it doesn't mean everybody's going to get it, but a lot more women were getting cancer because they were doing those menopausal drugs. So then, when that hit the news, the sale of menopausal drugs went dramatically down. And you can map that out over the next 10 years. And cancer rates went down along with that route. So, I mean, it's amazing. You can see it so clearly that drug was, that prescription of hormones was causing cancer in women. So it's pretty common knowledge that these drugs can cause cancer. And, women who are going through symptoms, they can't sleep, there's dryness, they lack a libido, they feel depressed, they're angry. I'll take anything. And unfortunately, they don't know that there are natural solutions that have proven to be more effective than taking those hormones. Now, those natural solutions go in two categories. One is taking what's called bioidentical hormones. Get a really good doctor to help you with bioidentical hormones. And even then, you don't know for sure it's going to work, and it hasn't been tested long term. Remember that. It's when you take hormones, your body actually stops making them. So I'm not in favor of that camp, but I know many doctors, friends, who prescribe those bioidentical hormones, and they get results quite often. And I've also heard horror stories. So you have to get the right diagnosis. You have to go in every month. You have to have your hormones tested and so forth. The other side of it is just simply taking well-tested Korean herbs. They've done double-blind studies that Korean herbs, three herbs for women, been used for thousands of years, take away hot flashes, take away all these symptoms of menopause by restoring hormonal balance in the body without taking hormones. And that's what my recommendation is. And there's a several variety of things women can do, but one is at my website, it's called RX for Women, and it explains those Korean herbs, and there's products, different stores carry them as well. And there's double-blind studies, but doctors don't know that, and so they don't know they're not taught the natural solutions. So I like to educate people that there are these options. And you had asked a question before, and I didn't fully answer it because I had a long answer to the first part of it, which is where does this ADHD come from? We can get it from hyperstimulation. We can also get it from a stressful childhood. Stress can overstimulate dopamine in the brain, a trauma, and then now the rest of your life you're seeking that higher stimulation in order to feel alive and well-being. It can also be your mother went through a stress during the pregnancy. It could also be your mother had high blood sugar during the pregnancy. It could also be your mother took Tylenol. These are all research showing your risk of ADHD dramatically goes up if your mother took acetaminophen, which is the ingredient in 95% of all the pain medications and cold medications. So if during pregnancy she took any of those medications, increases your risk by 3 times. Also, if you're an induced baby, they give a shot of Pitocin. That causes the contractions to be much more intense, and it's shown that 70% of induced babies all exhibit the symptoms of hyperactive behavior. So that's quite dramatic. That's done quite a bit. So there's many conditions around birth and the new birthing procedures and so forth that can give rise to a tendency towards ADHD. Now, I write in my book that I also had ADHD when I was growing up, and part of it was, I don't anymore, but the part of it was, one is induced labor, and then at second grade also had a big concussion to my brain. Concussions have been proven to, 10 times increased risk of a lifetime of ADHD unless it's naturally corrected.
Now, I'm curious because you said that as a child growing up you had ADHD and now you really don't. It's been reversed. What was life, as you can remember, like for you then? What would you experience that would cause or that people would see the noticeable symptoms of ADHD and the characteristics?
So mine was, every person has different, there are these natural temperaments that we're born with a tendency more of, some people are more active people, some people are more feeling sensitive, reactive people, some people are more creative people, they're always starting new things and whatever, and then there's people who are like really good administrators, controllers, they like to hold everything the same. So these are like 4 different complementary forces in different directions. And some people are more of one, more of the other. And we're always a blend of all of them. I'm the creative type. And what happens is when we have ADHD, we become distracted. And we dream a lot. Or we just, for me, I slept through school. I was just bored. And would just fall asleep on my a lot of kids, when they read, they get really, really tired. That's one form of it. So I would read and just fall asleep. If the teacher was interesting, I could stay focused and alert and awake, but just this sort of rote knowledge was boring to me. Anything new and different was exciting to me. And that's my temperament. I'm a creative, so I've written 25 books. I'm a researcher. I love learning new stuff and sharing it. I get excited about it, love it. Well,
sounds like you and me are a lot alike in that respect, because in school I was the same way. You got those hardcore teachers, lots of homework, and, if you, for instance, there was one health class I took, and it was in my sophomore year of high school, and one of my good friends was sitting next to me, and we actually challenged each other on who would get the best grade at the end of the class. And this was a teacher that was notorious for giving as many as 3 assignments in any given time a day. I mean, you really were put to the task, but it was amazing what I was also learning, things such as you were talking about earlier, hormones or how the pituitary gland works and all that sort of a thing, and all these terms and words you had to learn. And at the end of the semester, of course, I ended up beating him. He got an A- and I got an A in the class. But to achieve that in this class was pretty good. But it's because I kind of laid a challenge out before me.
Exactly. The challenge is a dopamine stimulator. Competition is a dopamine stimulator. And so there was that interaction. I look at where I woke up due to my own natural gifts and talents or whatever, and I did usually stay awake during the math class. The math class, at least, were problems that I could solve. And problem solving, again, I was really challenged. So when you're challenged, it will wake you up, and you've got to, move ahead, because challenge stimulates dopamine. Newness stimulates dopamine. Problem solving stimulates dopamine. And everybody sort of finds their route through which they can actually produce more dopamine, and the brain starts going more and more and more in that direction. And so when people get a lot of attention for having a problem, for complaining, and they get a lot of attention, stimulates dopamine, then the brain learns that if I just keep complaining about life and everything, then I'll have enough dopamine to feel alive. I mean, it's the ironies. We can get addicted to complaining. We can get addicted to drama. We can get addicted to exaggerating, the reasons why we're unhappy in our life. And our brain gets addicted to these loops. It goes into these loops. It's worrying loops. We get addicted to danger, to thinking about danger. So there's a lot of of distress and stress today, which is caused by some of these fundamental changes in our lifestyle, which include toxicity in the environment, high carbohydrate diet. As I mentioned before, it could be just high blood sugar in the mother or high blood sugar in the child. What that does is the sugar is one of the biggest non-drug dopamine stimulators. And so we just want to gobble down that sugar, and because then normal amounts of sugar don't do it. We need more and more and more. And what's happening with our, this is not over 50, but it still can apply. What's happening to our teenage kids is these boys are watching porn, every day, and they're getting off on it and so forth. And as a result, they can't be turned on to a real woman. See, if you're with a real woman in a real relationship, what happens is there's not just dopamine being stimulated, but there's estrogen and oxytocin and serotonin. These are all cofactors in the process of arousal. But when it's internet fantasy, it's just dopamine. And so that's like a high hit of, people are comparing it to heroin. And the irony of heroin, because the same part of the brain gets activated, maybe not as intense, but almost as intense, and you get addicted to it. Some of these kids are just addicted to it. Their body just has to have it until they go through withdrawals. And again, going through off of any of the withdrawals, the simple solutions that I recommend in my book, which is pre-digested proteins, the grape seed extract, vitamin C, these are all antioxidants, and omega-3s, which are necessary for brain function, and really good probiotics. The one I use is called Bravo Probiotic. It's from Switzerland. And these are like amazing remedies. They're right there in our hands if we can focus on them. But at the same time, the reason it's important that we look at the causative factors is if I was to give you a natural solution for your headache, but you continue to hit your head with a hammer, that natural solution can't help. So there has to be some behavior modification along with the natural supplementations. If you give a child Ritalin, sometimes you'll get a result, and you don't need to do a behavior modification because you've hijacked the brain and you've actually contributed to the problem more. And that's what now long-term studies have shown with these drugs, is that the condition actually gets worse over time, because instead of helping your body to make more dopamine, you're actually providing, in a sense, you're providing from outside the dopamine the brain needs. And so the brain doesn't heal itself to learn how to make dopamine. And over time, just like with the Parkinson's medicine, the cocaine or the Ritalin has less and less effect. Even with parents quite commonly report that in 1 year they have to double the dose with their kids, and that's called habituation. It means that the amount of buckets you've got to receive the dopamine becomes less and less and less.
Now, it's interesting you bring up behavior modification, and we have actually done a couple of shows now on the gut-brain relationship. Mainly from the perspective, a friend of ours had a child who had onset autistic spectrum conditions, if you will. And what really was devastating in that situation was here were some parents that really didn't have the financial resources to go and see these psychologists that were approaching that situation with behavior modification. When you're spending $150, $200 an hour for somebody who seemingly just seems to be guessing about what to do, that can be pretty hard on an individual that really wants to see results. And then you realize it isn't modifying the behavior, but it's actually modifying, as you were talking about, what's going on in the environment with their food, toxicity, so forth. And as you outline in your book, one of the first stages is actually the process of elimination of things in your life. Talk to us about how that works.
Well, generally, when it comes to any of these brain issues, and for children, middle age, over 50, whatever, you're talking about gut health. So food is everything. And once you have gut problems, then even addressing those gut problems sometimes isn't effective because the brain is out of balance, the hormones are out of balance, that causes stress levels, your cortisol is increased. So you're trying to help your gut, but your cortisol levels are out of balance. That keeps causing inflammation and problems in the gut. So you start, basically what I suggest to people to do is, first of all, let's just say for that couple that can't afford the advice, the support they're getting, a lot of great books on behavior modification, and I'm all for that, like making lists and so forth, and how to react when your child is flapping or getting upset and crying. What is your reaction? How should you approach that situation? Those are good behavior insights. And we talked just now about behavior modification, which is dietary changes, which is so important. Start to eliminate various things, and we'll talk about those things. But here's something you can add. It's always easier to add than eliminate, I'll tell you. And that is a 45-minute hot bath, 102 degrees. Just that has been proven to dramatically diminish autism symptoms. Just that.
Wow, really?
Yes. And
That's
there's only
amazing.
one study proving it. I've been teaching this for 15 years.
I can't imagine anybody who wouldn't want a hot tub in their house, right? Now you got a good reason.
Now you got a good reason. There's nothing better. You crank it up to 103 degrees and sit in that for 45 minutes, and what will happen, see, people go, what's that going to do? Well, what that does, a lot of stuff, but one of the things it does that's most powerful, and they've seen this. Let me give this study, which is, and I've reversed autism using hydrotherapy with some supplements.
Wow.
And we can talk about that. It's in the book. But the first thing that happens when your body heats up, it's like cooking a chicken. It takes a while. It takes a while to heat up fully when you're in hot water. But when you're in hot water, your body starts heating up, and it induces a low-grade fever. And the low-grade fever stimulates in the brain something called heat shock proteins. Now, once we get the science of probiotics together, there's another healing science, which is in its early stages, where they're studying the 10 different types of heat shock proteins the body makes. And these heat shock proteins are neural protectors and neural regenerators and cellular regenerators. They're what your body does. It's a backup emergency system when everything has gone down. And one of the reasons we have these brain problems, again, there's many, many reasons that new things we've added, is when our children get fevers, we give them fever suppressants. Whenever you give a child or an adult a fever suppressant, you've just shut down the liver's ability to make antioxidants. So your body basically only goes into a fever when you already are not making enough antioxidants, and it's like a super antioxidant in a sense. But your liver makes this glutathione, which puts out all the fires of stress in the brain, to put simple terms, called oxidative stress. So your glutathione will put out those fires. But when there's such a big fire, when there's not enough firemen for it, then the federal government comes in with more firemen. Other states come along, and that's called heat shock proteins. Those heat shock proteins are the rescue guys. But the rescue guys are produced through fever. And fever is now being suppressed for the last 100 years. People have been using, started out with aspirin, then they started using all these other acetaminophen is now the popular one that's everywhere. 80,000 people go to the hospital with dangerous, life-threatening symptoms, and some die from taking just a few over-the-counter cold medicine, pain pills, and maybe another thing for allergies. You're taking it all at the same time. Boom! You get too much of this acetaminophen, and you die, or you go to the hospital. 94,000 people a year. Now, certainly people can use those same medicines to commit suicide. They won't put how much you need to take for suicide, but it's not that much. I mean, it's amazing how dangerous these over-the-counter drugs are. And yet they're big propaganda things from the drug companies saying, oh, watch out, taking vitamin C, which never hurt anybody.
There's always a conspiracy when you're on the other side of the fence, isn't there?
It's just amazing. That what people need to know, and just from a political point of view, is there are representatives in the House, in our government, which every year they try to pass a law, and it gets voted down, thank goodness, by a slim margin. But they try to pass a law basically saying that we have to go into agreement with a treaty we signed with Europe. In Europe, they already follow it. So you can't go to a health food store in Europe and buy 500 milligrams of vitamin C. That's just an example of what they've done. because 500 milligrams of vitamin C is a therapeutic dose. It's proven to help the body. Anything that's proven to help the body is now considered a drug, and therefore you have to go to a doctor and get a prescription for it. And if you get the prescription, you have to pay for the prescription, or you go and you pay for the vitamin C, and it's 3 to 4 times more expensive because it's a drug. You can't buy the things that we can buy now. We're the free country when it comes to natural solutions, and we have to hold on to that. So this is like they're trying to take it away. I mean, it's amazing. But anyway, back to heat shock proteins, which is, again, it's all new science. But I discovered, 15 years ago when I was working with autistic children, we did a documentary of it. It's putting them in hot tubs and also with supplements, and symptoms in 3 days. Kids with Tourette's, the Tourette's was dramatically dropping. Kids who hadn't talked ever, suddenly 25 words pop out, and sentences, and it just helps the brain to find its organization. Is these heat shock proteins, and generally speaking, the most dangerous thing we can do to our children is take Tylenol or take aspirins to prevent or to treat a fever. There's never been a case of any injury due to fever, and doctors don't know that, but go online, you'll see the whole evidence is there. This is all mythology that you need to take a drug. The number 2 selling drug in the world is a fever suppressant. I mean, this is a big lobby.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
And basically what will happen with fevers, if it drops suddenly, you will have a seizure, and never has there been any injury from the seizure unless the child was to fall and hit their head. Then that could cause a concussion. So they just need supervision when they're under a fever. They need comfort. And instead of trying to cool them down, you want to cover them lightly with a blanket or something so the body stays warm. The body's wanting to be warm. If you cool them down, that causes the seizure. You want the body to produce these heat shock proteins, and we're just not doing it. This is when all these big epidemics started. When aspirin happened around the beginning of last century. I mean,
right?
It's amazing what we've done to our system. There's so many different places where these drugs interfere with normal processes, and it's not. Everybody knows. I mean, this is not disputed that acetaminophen, which is in Tylenol and other over-the-counter pain medicines or allergy medicines or cold medicines or cough medicines and fever suppressants, it's all lining the shelves. This particular ingredient, biggest selling drug in the world, number 2, will suppress glutathione production in the body, which is your body's own antioxidant. And it does that, and it also suppresses our brain's ability to have a fever, which can heal the condition. So anyway, the study on autistic kids is they put 30 autistic kids in a warm bath, like a normal thing you'd give to a child. No changes took place. But then for 30 minutes, they put these kids in a hot bath of 102 degrees. My recommendation has always been 103 from ancient books that I read. But at 102 degrees, the children all displayed immediately more eye contact, more conversational skills, more cooperation, more peace. And then they stopped, as opposed to the recommendation is once you stimulate these heat shock proteins, they last for 2 days. So you need to do it every other day. It will also improve sleep if you do it at night. And sleep is one of the other big problems. As we get older, we're not sleeping enough. If you're not sleeping enough, that can be caused by blood sugar issues, but then the brain can't make the hormones necessary to stay healthy and vibrant. It can't make the brain chemicals. So the one thing is hot baths right away. We've taken a lot of time on that, but it's something inexpensive. Then there's things that are more and more expensive. I mean, you can go all the way up to getting stem cells, which is $10,000 a shot,
Wow.
But, people can't get that stuff. But you come back down to what's reasonable for people and will produce immediate benefits is pre-digested proteins. And I've discovered this, and nobody else has ever done this before. It's the most amazing thing, which is you take these, people have protein shakes. Well, if you measure how much of that protein in a shake, it's powdered, so it's supposed to be easier to digest. Actually, only 32% is utilized of the protein, and the rest of it is waste and has to be put out of the body. 80% of the energy of digestion goes to eliminating the toxicity of the undigested proteins. But still, that's protein. The same thing would happen eating eggs or having a steak or chicken or anything. The body just can't fully digest. Now, if you have compromised digestion, that goes down even more. Well, what I've discovered, this is my protein shake from 15 years ago, is I took, first of all, two proteins that you can't even buy together on the market. One of them is whey protein, which you'll see in all the protein shakes. Most of that whey can't be digested hardly at all because it's been pasteurized. So you have to have raw whey protein called undenatured whey protein. And then there's the protein they make cheese with, and that costs much more. So nobody puts it in, and it's also harder to digest. If you have compromised digestion, people, basically have difficulty digesting it. Well, guess what? If you do it raw, you can digest it much easier. But still, we have compromised digestion, so you can actually buy enzymes that your body would produce. These are all these protein-digesting enzymes, fat-digesting enzymes, carbohydrate-digesting enzymes. So what I did is put these two proteins together that when we're children in mother's milk, you'll get a certain amount of whey and you'll get a certain amount of casein. If you're a boy, you get more casein. If you're a girl, you get more whey. It's amazing how the body responds and produces just what the baby needs. Well, it's just what the brain needs to develop. So I put together a shake for men and a shake for women where you get this same balance of greater casein for men and greater whey protein for women. The next thing is I put in the enzymes to digest it, and I put in the minerals to activate the enzymes. Now, if you put this powder, just put it in a glass, add water, shake it up, and let it sit for 45 minutes. It bubbles. It digests itself. It literally becomes pre-digested proteins, which is called protein peptides. That's what your body does with these proteins right before the brain chemicals are produced. So you have to let it sit 45 minutes to digest itself with the minerals that activate the enzymes, that activate the digestion of the proteins. Then after 45 minutes, you can add some ice and put it in a blender, and it tastes really good, like a milkshake. It's got all the vitamins in it. It's got all the nutrients in it. It's a whole meal. But the key thing is the proteins are pre-digested. And the Swiss, just last year, a Swiss company tested that once it's been digested for 45 minutes. And they said that your body will assimilate 92% of it. 92%, that's 3 times more assimilation. And way more energy because your body's not spending all this energy digesting. And most people over 50 have noticed this, is that after a meal, instead of feeling energized, they get satisfied, but then they feel kind of tired. And it's quite common now for people to take naps after eating a nice lunch. They take a nap, they take their dinner, they watch some TV, they conk out, and they just think they're tired from working or they're getting old. What's their digestion isn't digesting the food. So what we can do is, and the first step is get easy to digest proteins to feed the brain, to make the brain chemicals, all the cofactors that will help it to work. So that's all good information.
Now, it's interesting when you talk about eating and then having that food crash. I remember one morning I went out to breakfast and had the typical breakfast that I like to have, and I noticed I feel like going home and taking a nap now. And it was at that moment I realized I don't want to be eating breakfast like this anymore. This will be like once in a great while situation because you shouldn't feel like this after you eat.
That's right.
And that being said, we actually did some really interesting shows, especially when it comes to natural solutions to health. And there's a gentleman out of Portland, Oregon, who actually brews his own label of kombucha tea. I don't know if you're familiar with that. And I know up until last summer I'd heard about it thinking, okay, so this is like, okay, all of a sudden green tea is good for you for this, and now they've got this kombucha. So I didn't really know what it was. And then last summer as I began doing this series of interviews with him, he produces these books called Kitchen Sink Farmer. And one of the things he talks about is sprouting seeds. And we actually had a woman some years back who had produced a book on that very thing, and it wasn't really clicking at the time for me. And but it had turned out that in sprouting seeds, like it could be flax seeds or chia seeds, whatever, you sprout them so it gets rid of the coating enzyme that actually protects the seed from being eaten before it sprouts. So in the sprouting process, it gets rid of that, but then it increases the nutritional value, as he says, because he's a researcher as well, by sometimes up to 2,000%. And he says what's interesting is when you take these in, do the sprouting of the seeds, whatever it is that you'll feel energized, almost like you can almost levitate. He says it'll take probably a couple of months because you're making different changes. But I was trying to think about that. He says, how would you like to be eating food that actually gives you energy? And I could totally relate to that after that bad breakfast experience.
Yeah, that's the way kids are when they're young and their digestion is good, and that's changing now too. But generally, we ate meals and we got energy from it. But you really notice this as you're getting over 50, and it's this weakened digestive system. Because one of the things people don't realize is when you're stressed, your hormones are out of balance, your body doesn't make hydrochloric acid to digest your proteins. And when your body doesn't make hydrochloric acid to digest your proteins, ironically, then these proteins go into your stomach and they putrefy there and causes more acid, but not the right kind of acid to digest them. And that's what acid upset is. When people have acid stomach or acids are coming up, it's literally because their body isn't making the acid, and so the food is turning acidic. And the solution, once again, is digestive enzymes. You need to. Some apple cider vinegar can help as well. Small amounts will help neutralize that acid, so your body can then start putting in some healthy, good acid to digest your proteins. But to put in these already pre-digested foods is great. Kombucha, my mother made it when I was a little kid. She was all in the health stuff, and now it's really, really popular. I know the guy in Oregon that does it, and kombucha is a great probiotic drink. You see, these are fermented products. Fermented products means they're rich and the bacteria that's missing in our gut. Yogurt is also another really good fermented product that's missing. The product Bravo yogurt at my website is got 42 probiotics, a mix. It's a starter mix where you add it to colostrum, which is the first milk that comes out of the cow on the first day, and it's rich in these immune factors. And it also has other probiotics, and these 2 bags of different probiotics you combine together and you make your own yogurt. And now they have a concentrated premix so that you don't have to make it at home. You can just take it in capsules. But that is, again, it's getting those probiotics into the gut, and fermented foods are fantastic for that. That's A. B is pre-digested proteins will help your digestion over time. And the third thing we haven't talked about, which is, and sprouts, by the way, I agree with you. Sprouts have been in the health movement for the longest time, and it does. Sprouted flax can increase certain nutrients in it, not all 2,000 times. I mean, to sprout your foods are fantastic. Even with chia seeds, just to soak them first overnight is really good. It will increase the potency of it. And you can buy, I don't carry it at my store, but you can buy sprouted flax, sprouted flax seeds. And it's powdered, so it's literally a omega-3 mix that you can add to your shake if you wish. If you were to add it to my shake, I'd recommend you do it after the 45 minutes. You want those proteins, the enzymes, without much to interfere with the digestion process. The other thing, which is so important, is the minerals. And there's 5 minerals that are very important for brain function. And every person over 50, in my opinion, needs to be taking at least the cheapest of those minerals, which is something called lithium orotate. There's been New York Times articles about it. The Buck Foundation here where I live in Marin County, they're specialized in preventing Alzheimer's and treating Alzheimer's, and they talk about taking 1 little pill of lithium orotate every day can prevent it, because lithium orotate has been proven to protect the brain cells from neuron death. There's so many things in our food today that cause neurons in the brain to die. One I mentioned was the pain pills, but another one is just simply MSG. MSG, you can see in a laboratory, kills brain cells. But if those brain cells are soaked in lithium, no other substance will do this, but it's a mineral whose function is to protect neurons in the brain. The neurons don't die. It really helps the body. For thousands of years in all the natural springs, the most popular ones always had high content of this mineral lithium in it. Most people are afraid of lithium because that's what they give to people with bipolar, and they give people with bipolar an inferior form of lithium, which is called lithium carbonate, and they have to give 100 times the dose that the body needs in order to get it into the brain. So any good thing you take in 100 times the dose is going to cause some side effects. So the lithium orotate. Orotate is a substance in mother's milk. They mix with the lithium, and it bonds, and it carries it across the blood-brain barrier into the brain. So you basically get a very efficient dose, little tiny dose of 4.5 milligrams. If you're stressed, you can go with like 3 or 4 times that amount. And you find your stress goes away. Your memory starts to improve. Your calmness increases. But you don't feel like you've just taken a drug. It doesn't alter anything. It just stops some of that looping, and you feel normal as opposed to feeling like something has increased you up or brought you down. It doesn't have that effect. It's just pure natural. The other minerals are potassium, calcium, zinc, and magnesium, bonded to orotic acid, and those are the cofactors. So I always recommend if you take lithium orotate, you take the cofactors. And there you get the cofactors. I put that together at my website. It's called Super Minerals for Men, Super Minerals for Women. And they also contain the lithium, but on a stressful day, you basically could take 2 or 3 of the lithium orotates. There's no chance of overdosing or any negative side effect. There is a condition where if you were taking like 5 a day for a while, and I'm not recommending that unless you really have a lot of emotional distress, that much lithium lithium has the benefit of spreading iodine throughout the body. And so if you took the doses I just talked about, the iodine in your thyroid might reduce, and you might feel tired. So there's a product called nascent iodine. And probably everybody over 50 needs to take 1 or 2 drops of this every day. Start with 1 drop, and you'll see your brain will focus more. It's so powerful.
Wow.
This has been used for, it was the first natural supplement ever invented in the 1700s. Got a doctor by the name of Lugal. He came up with it. And then another doctor, sort of a psychic doctor in the last century, Edgar Casey. Have you heard that name before?
Absolutely.
Edgar Casey. 80% of every diagnosis he made, he said use the iodine. It's just something that if every cell in the body has an iodine receptor site, we need it. We evolved from iodine because all of our culture evolved along the coastlines where you get a seaweed, which is rich in iodine, and eating fish that eat the seaweed is rich in iodine. So we need to get these more iodine into our system, generally speaking, particularly if you're not living by the coast and eating seafood, and you really need extra iodine.
Well, we've certainly covered the gamut on nutritional ways that we can help heal the brain, and we just have just a couple of minutes left. One of the last things I wanted to focus on was ways to, I guess, exercise the brain, and one of the things that you actually talk about, it's interesting how you came to this almost in the same way I did, and that was to meditation. Apparently, you went to go take a class about samurai, and I actually discovered Zen, and that's where the meditation came in, and tell us why that's really an important factor for people to consider.
Meditation is such a profound thing, but I want to emphasize that for many women, they find it difficult, and the more they have ADHD, the more difficult it is because their mind is constantly wandering. And for men, actually, with ADD, meditation can actually, if they practice it long enough, it can actually become super, super easy because it is a process of increasing focus. And we want more dopamine. It makes dopamine, the practice of meditation, and it also makes serotonin. And one of the things, interesting way of describing what meditation is, it's deliberate boredom. When you have, the only way your receptor sites, dopamine receptor sites, come back up is when they're not being stimulated, hyperstimulated. As long as they're being hyperstimulated with worry and anxiety or overaction or over this, over that, as long as they're being overstimulated, they can't come back up. But what meditation is deliberate boredom, because you're no longer getting any stimulation from outside. And when you stop stimulation from outside, these receptor sites start coming up. Think about, here's an example as an analogy. If you go for a day without eating food, next day when you eat the food, it tastes so good. That's because when you overstimulate the tongue, there are receptor sites. And those receptor sites be overstimulated with all these delicious foods, they start downregulating. You get less and less buckets. But if you go for a day without food, those buckets are going, hey, we need some stimulation, and so you get more buckets. And now they open up like flowers, saying, give me, give me, give me. And you get some food, and then they go, this is great. So that's called the upregulation by depriving yourself of external stimulation. And that's what meditation is on a biological level, is you're no longer getting external stimulation, but you can be watching your breath, extremely boring process, and you go, okay, it's supposed to be boring. I'll just bring my attention back. What you're doing is training your attention to work even when you're completely bored. And so your mind wanders off. You wander back. Your mind wanders off. And just do it for 5 minutes to start, and then 10 minutes to start. And these receptor sites will start increasing, and life becomes more colorful. Life becomes richer. Life becomes more in balance. The simple things of life are very fulfilling rather than having to turn on the TV or hear the news or watch a game or drink alcohol or take drugs or eat sugar. There's so many other fulfilling things, just taking a deep breath and looking out at the trees. And that's bringing those receptor sites back up again. And then you build up to like 15 minutes twice a day, how much you can endure of that boredom. And people have thought, I'm supposed to experience bliss and my mind's supposed to become empty. Yeah, I have that experience. I'm a master meditator, 45 years of doing it,
like you, too, I remember back when I was first beginning to read about Zen and the Japanese culture, that was the thing you were caught up in, was that romantic idea of some blissful state that's beyond world kind of thing. But, and again, this is really a different subject off of what we've been talking about, but it's one and the same. And I'd like to welcome the opportunity to have you come back on the show again so we can get into how we can, the things that we can do to stimulate the brain and then relax the brain all at the same time, because we covered a lot of this show with the nutrition. But first of all, for our listeners, John, could you go ahead and give out a website where people can find out more information, how to get your book, things like that?
Yeah, I know all that stuff I said on the brain and hormones and glutathione. It's really hard to gather all that information at once.
But you made it simple. That's the good thing.
I do simplify it. It's like to listen to this again and again. It takes time to let it absorb. I do have little 10-minute videos, over 100, on the different conditions in the body, how the brain and body work, and they're kind of like fun to listen to. It's simple, it's basic, but it's still new. It takes a while to absorb new. And that's at marsvenus.com. And there's blogs, video blogs on health. And you can go to that and you'll see a list of all these different conditions. Click on one and a video comes up. It's free. There's also a store where the products that I see out there that as John recommends, these are products I recommend. I give a little video on why some person might benefit from that, and helping us to understand our body-mind connection, what we can do. But along with this, I just want to emphasize, we've talked so much about supplements and diet and hot baths and all that. Another major factor is you could do all the best things for your body on a biological level. We need to have love in our lives. We need to be loving to other people. We need to feel we're making a difference. We need to be easy on ourselves. So there is that psychological side of it. But, when we talked about these children, they can get all the love in the world, but the biology isn't there. It doesn't register. So we need mind and body. And then I'm happy to come back. We'll talk about some of the ideas in one of my books, and one of my seminars is called Radiant Mind Seminar. And I teach people these different various meditation practices, specific ones for different people and specific ones for men and for women, because our approach tends to be different so that we can make it easy and we can get results soon.
Well, very good. Again, the book is Staying Focused in a Hyper World. This is book one. Our guest today, John Gray. And one more time for our listeners, what's the website?
The website is marsvenus.com. There's no dash, just one word, marsvenus.com. And they could also Google my name, John Gray, and my website comes up.
You'll be pretty easy to find, I'm sure.
Yeah, pretty easy.
Well, John, thank you so much for taking the time to share this valuable information with our listeners. And again, I'd like to invite you to come back and we can talk about, more of the psychological meditation, exercise with the brain, because there's some really neat stories there in and of itself that I'd like our listeners to be able to hear and, just feel very empowered and uplifted to the fact that, who you are isn't entirely your fault. Certainly maybe some of the decisions are, but, this is the way that you can change to become the person that you want to be. And it's because of people like you out there in the world that give people the confidence and the hope that they need to be able to move in that direction.
Thank you so much.
Thank you again, John. We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for tuning in. You can also discover more. Visit us at Beyond50Radio.com. That is the number 50. We encourage you to sign up for our weekly e-news updates. Stay up to date with what's going on in the world of Beyond 50. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.